I'm going to kick us off. My name is Erin Woods, and I am Kate. Thanks, Kate. See, I've got some supporters in the crowd. I love it. I am, for a matter of visual description, a white woman with sort of dark blonde hair. I'm wearing a pink blouse and am in front of some mixed media art in my background. And I will ask the speakers when they introduce themselves to introduce themselves that way as well. But I'm calling in from my office in my home in Banff, Alberta, which is in Treaty 7 territory, the traditional home of the Stoney Nakoda, Tsuut'ina, Blackfoot, and Métis Region 3 peoples who have historically and continue to call this place home. And Banff is and has always been a place for migrants and immigrants. And so there are many of us who are very fortunate to live here. And I think as we talk about intentionality in the environment, it's great just to remember that what we're talking about is place. We're talking about where we are. And Diane Ragsdale from the Netherlands even. So it would be great as we do this, and people already are, just to put in the chat where you're calling from, just so that we get a sense of where our community is joining us from. And I will hand it over to Krista maybe to introduce yourself, and then we'll just do brief introductions around, and then we'll dive into the meat of the matter.
Sounds great. Hi, everybody. I'm Krista Bradley. I'm Director of Programs and Resources at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. I'm calling you from my home in Silver Spring, Maryland, outside of DC. And it's the traditional lands of the Piscataway and the Pamunkey peoples. I am, my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a Black woman with a dark purple shirt on and a gray sweater, bright blue headband, blue glasses, sitting in front of my Peloton and a window with lots of plants. It's good to be with you.
Great, thank you. Alexis?
Sure, I am Alexis Frassz. I am calling in from unceded Ohlone territory in Oakland, California. I am a light-skinned woman with short, bleached blonde hair. It's kind of a mohawk, and I'm wearing a black sweater and sitting in front of a couple of posters by Shepard Fairey. And I work at the at Helicon Collaborative, which is an organization that kind of focuses on the intersection of culture and the environment. We do a lot of things in that space, which I will talk about later.
Thanks, Alexis. Vijay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vijay Matthew, and my pronouns are he, him. A visual description of myself is I have brown skin, short black hair, and a little gray stubble. I'm wearing a black short sleeve shirt with a collar, and my background is a white wall. And I'm calling from the Boston metro area, which is the land of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people. And I'm a co-founder of HowlRound Theater Commons, which is based at Emerson College in Boston. And it's a media publisher of essays and live streams that are produced by and for the professional performing arts community.
Great, thank you. And I'm imagining that most of this, my hope is that most of this will really be more of just a conversation, a dialogue, because Vijay and Krista and Alexis all know each other. Certainly in the chat, feel free to any comments. And then there is also a Q&A. As you can see, there's a Q&A tab. So we will do a Q&A section at the end. So as questions come up, if you would plop them in there, that would be great. I'll try to keep an eye on those. But I would love to, by way of introductions, have each of the panelists talk about who they are, their work, where their work and this idea of intentionality in the environment, where that starts to intersect. So just sort of a workplace overview, as well as maybe a couple little tidbits about you that aren't reflected in your job description, in your title, a little something that we might want to know about you. And I'd love to see that in the chat from individuals as well. Where do you work? Or if you're comfortable, what organization do you work for? And some other little nuggets about, do you love French fries or are you double jointed or whatever that might be. So maybe Alexis, will you kick us off with just a little bit more about Helicon and your work and a couple tidbits about you that we might not know?
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with the tidbits so I don't forget them. I probably would. Let's see. I have a garden that I'm pretty obsessed with, and have learned a little bit of permaculture. So I try to apply that as best I can. I am a rock climber, and I am learning how to build things. And I built a shed in my backyard, which I'm very proud of. But as far as Helicon, so we, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we started really venturing into the environmental space and climate change. We came out of the arts. And so really the work that we do is at the intersection of culture and the environment. And that means that we really think of the environmental issues that we face, including climate change, as cultural issues, not primarily technological or scientific issues. And that is a growing kind of perspective, I think, in the environmental sector broadly, that, you know, we actually know many of the technical things we need to do, but how to change human behavior, how to move in a completely new way as a society is more of a social issue than and a cultural issue than a technical one. Granted, science plays a big part in it. I'm not denigrating that, but and so the other piece of it, you know, is that because we came out of the cultural sector, we're really interested in the role that culture and artists, creative practices can play in helping to make that transition to, you know, we talk about a just transition. That's the language that we like, because we've always had equity as a focus of our work. And really that means that, you know, whatever we do, the solutions protect and prioritize the people who are most impacted. And, you know, focuses on making a better world for everybody. So I guess I'll stop there for now.
Great, thank you. Vijay, do you want to jump in on that to talk about your work and where intentionality in the environment and your work intersect, and some tidbits?
All right. Okay. So tidbits. Let's see. I'm a parent to a 12-year-old. I'm addicted to spicy food and must have it every day. And I'm almost completely free of all social media platforms, liberated. So, okay, and then intersection with the work. So HowlRound Theater Commons, its editorial agenda is to amplify progressive ideas and conversation and perspectives from performing artists themselves who are producing the essays and live streams. And unfortunately still, the climate emergency is actually a progressive and disruptive topic. And we have been publishing for several years incredible essays written by artists from around the world about their work at that intersection of performing arts and climate change, both about actual pieces that address that, as well as production methods and different systems of how the work comes into being that is aligned with different paradigms. Yeah, so I'm coming at it from that perspective, and similar to what Alexis said, really seeing it as a cultural issue. And it's a culture that created the crisis, and it's culture that will get us, that will mitigate or transition us into a different form. Yeah. So, and I'll just throw a link in there to our tag on climate change, where you'll find essays and videos about that artists have made themselves.
Thank you. And Krista, of course, the work that you do and climate change, that there's sort of, you know, or emissions in any way, they can't be separated. And so certainly you've been thinking about this a lot. So I'd love to hear about sort of the work that you're doing and where that intentionality in the environment intersects, and some juicy tidbits about you also. Don't have to be juicy.
Well, I don't know, juicy tidbits. I have become a plant mom during this COVID time, and I started with one plant and now I have 15. So I'm really enjoying that. I love to cook, and I have been a choral ensemble singer for probably 25, 30 years. So that is my thing, making music with people that you can't create on your own. So how am I connected to this work? APAP is the service organization for the presenting, touring, and booking industry in the performing arts. And by that, I mean we support the people, the artists, the agents and managers, and the venues that provide the infrastructure for artists to connect with communities around the country and around the globe. And by nature of the work of the touring, the live performing arts touring industry, we spend most of our time moving people and our work and our arts across boundaries, across states, across oceans, across continents, and that in its nature is all about connecting artists with audiences. But the way that we do it right now is fairly extractive. The model that we've built our work on means that artists have to tour enormously to make a living, and venues have to position themselves as interesting spaces where only certain artists go to. So there's lack of an incentive to sometimes be as thinking in partnership in ways that you can connect with other like-minded colleagues to bring artists to your communities and to do it in a way that's long-term and not for one night. The other piece of what APAP does is we're one of the largest conveners of the performing arts industry every year. We have our APAP conference in New York. Typically, it usually attracts 3,000 to 4,000 people coming into the city, and it's an important piece in the industry and in terms of gathering the field. However, it's also gathering a lot of people, making people travel a great deal to come to one place, and it puts out a lot of waste. so both as as a service organization trying to be a couple of steps ahead of the field and provide information, resources, support on how to do our work better, how to be sustainable as a field, and how to be just and equitable and accessible. The whole idea of being, are interested in environmentally sound practices is really critical. And how do we think about our work differently now that we've had 13 months to have to reimagine how we work. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. And I think all of you touched on this idea that a lot of what we're talking about is how do we stay connected with our communities? How do we share, whether it's art or a lot of the people in the, and joining us maybe from arts organizations or maybe nonprofits more generally, but often those organizations, their fundamental reason for being is connecting with community and connecting now in different, maybe more creative ways. So I'd love to just have maybe an informal chat, Vijay, Alexis, and Krista, just about that, about what are we learning about connecting with community now that the old ways for 13 months we couldn't do, and we're coming to a real understanding of how damaging those ways might be. So unmute yourselves, discuss.
Well, I mean, I can jump in just to kick it off. I think that to sort of some of the things Krista was mentioning, many of us have discovered not that I don't want to minimize the real pain and suffering that's happened with COVID and the things that have been really difficult. And I think that there have been things that we've discovered that are really valuable about not traveling as much. Having more time with our families, getting into plants and gardening, connecting to our bodies in different ways, and I think also recognizing what really matters, that and how we're connected to our communities, that if our community is not well, we're not well. And I think that the arts especially, but so many businesses are like this, have become very disembodied, actually, that there's this idea that it's very mental, it's very global. And I think the pandemic sort of forced us to be more local. And my hope would be that I think we will be forced to be more local in the future, whether we like it or not. But I think that there's also great potential to see that as an opportunity and something really beautiful, especially because we have these platforms where we can actually connect more broadly, but then really go deep in our local place. So.
And Vijay, your thoughts about that sort of the global and local, because I know a lot of the work that you're doing is really about this sort of streaming, how do we connect virtually?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think the pandemic, in a sense, created uncontrolled collapse of a lot of our arts field, especially the touring and international presenting parts of it. And it was, a cold turkey kind of quitting of the major tool we use for international touring and presenting, which is air travel, fast travel, which there's no quote unquote green alternative to. The industry itself has said that they can't develop carbon-free technology in any kind of timeline that's going to avert total catastrophe. So I mean, there's that one thing, and so hopefully there's going to go from uncontrolled collapse to now continuing a controlled collapse, and putting creative limitations, like, for example, an organization stepping out in a very difficult way to say, we're not going to travel anymore using airplanes, and using that as a creative prompt to really rethink basically everything about their purpose, who are they serving. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is, like, during this pandemic, speaking from the perspective of HowlRound and publishing and performing artists wanting to connect and share ideas with each other. This has been an incredible moment for artists from the global South and global North to be in the same virtual space together like never before. And there's been some really incredible just this kind of cultural mobility that happens in this virtual space that had never happened before, as well as breaking down of the ongoing decades-long silos of the deaf performing arts community, deaf theater makers with the hearing community. Still very, very, like what we heard in the first session, very siloed communities. And again, this virtual platforms being able to break that down. And so those are very promising little beginnings of new paths and creative ways that we can rethink what we're doing.
Yeah, building on both Vijay and Alexis's points, we've seen presenting organizations connect to audiences that they didn't know that they had, and to have reach a much more a browner audience than they thought they had, because there's less of a barrier, and it's also been inspirational for artists to create work to reach a specific audience that may look like them in a different way without an intermediary, which I think has been really interesting and bodes well for how we will be connecting directly with our audiences as artists. I think that's been a really great innovation. I think that artists, we've heard at least, that they think that they can have a better balance in terms of making a living, that they don't have to travel so much, and they can spend more time with their family, and they can find new ways to connect with each other, and make work in a virtual kind of way, and that's super exciting. I think for people that work in the performing arts as administrators, it is not necessarily very people friendly. We seem to prize, long hours, extreme work, being in the theater for 18, 20 hours, not taking time off, et cetera. And so for workers in this industry, I think we've all kind of realized that that's not only unsustainable, but it's not something that we really want to do again. So how do we reimagine and advocate for a different way of working, for us working in the cultural sector, maybe not making work, but certainly supporting the work that does get made, and recalibrate what we think is a just way to work for us in the arts and cultural sector, which I think is long overdue. Mm-hmm. And then, to your point, Vijay, about accessibility and equity, we at APAP discovered that even with the conference, that our conference is an expensive conference. People cannot access it to the extent that they would like to. And yet we attracted so many more people on the Swap Cart platform this year that would never have been able to come. And in fact, the leaders of organizations, who are usually the ones that come to our conference, invited and were able to give all of their staff access to thinkers and doers and mavericks that were talking about innovation, which was amazing. So we, in our practice, realized that we can be much more accessible and inclusive and equitable, and should be, by pursuing a more hybrid model. So those are some things that I'm seeing.
Can I just jump in with one thing to build on that, which is, I think that we often, and I think this has been a miscalculation actually from the environmental movement initially, where there was a lot of talk about sacrifice and what we need to give up. And I don't think that's untrue. I think there are things that we need to give up, but I'm one of those people that got a pandemic puppy, okay? And I want to say that I did give up a lot when I got my puppy, and I gained a lot. And I think that that's the piece that's missing. And, so it's like, what if doing less is not actually a sacrifice? What if it actually gives us more time? What if, one of the things, for example, that we've been told would really help the climate is actually working a 4-day work week.
Yeah.
That also connects to, worker well-being and having time to care for your family. And that means you spend less money on caring for your family. And so there's all sorts of proliferating effects that can happen from doing less. It's just not how our culture typically thinks about progress.
Exactly. Good point.
I want to add to the workplace and work organization and how that's structured, how that's related to actually climate crisis, where the idea of extraction or costs or hidden costs or the cost of doing business that we kind of put aside and we just let them happen, that's related to the workplace. And that in organizations that have less of a hierarchy in terms of a rentier class of people on top who, no matter what they're doing, no matter what value they're creating for the organization, are always somehow extracting more wealth, more resources, more longevity, more opportunities, more resources than people lower in the hierarchy who may, for example, be artists, who are freelance, contractor, paid very little, who are struggling to just make basic ends meet, basic needs met. And so that mindset that there can actually be, and that we all collectively kind of accept this as a norm, or it's normal that there is a rentier class in our nonprofit or arts organizations. That's the same mindset that is also capable of allowing a climate emergency to run away out of our control, even to the point where it's truly on the table whether or not we're going to survive as a species,
Right.
or that our complex civilization is going to actually be something we can keep on to. That's truly on the table. So there's that mind shift, that change of perspective and change of culture that has to also infiltrate, in talking just from the arts, nonprofit organizations, they truly need to look into maybe the worker cooperative model or some other kind of system that is not just based on cheap, free labor.
And it would be great. I would love actually to have you all three maybe talk just a little bit more about that it's come up a bunch of times, that this is really about a cultural shift. It's not a technological problem. It's not about the science. It's actually about who we are and how we want to be in the world. And that what we value and what we think about as sustainable, not only in terms of the environment, but in terms of our own lives and our own selves and our neighborhoods, all of those sort of cultural things, especially in response to some of the conversations I know that happened this morning about base camp and reverting to 1983. And so if there is this movement, there's a pull to 1983 and there's a pull towards these possible futures. I would just love your thoughts about how we might weight the scales one way. And then also, since I've got the floor, if anybody's got questions, please do start to populate the Q&A section, and we will start to field questions from all of you as well. So thanks. The pull towards the future. Or what have we seen that's worked? Maybe it's not a massive shift to the future. Maybe it's just small little changes that, as Alexis says, aren't necessarily sacrifices. They're just shifts.
Well, and I don't want to minimize the scale of change. I think the reality is we are in and entering more so a time of accelerating change. And I think that we just need to come to terms with that as a society. Really, the question of whether we want to change or we don't want to change, it's just not an option. It's not our choice. We do get to choose how we want to meet that moment, and do we want to, and I think, for our own survival, as Jay said, but also especially for justice, because there are people, climate change has sort of been presented as if it's this far away thing. And I think more and more of us are dealing with, we have flooding, we have fires where I am in California, that are extreme impacts on our quality of life and our ability to work, as if, that's not the primary concern that most of us have when those things are going on, is whether or not we can work, but they do affect our ability to work and to participate in our industry, whatever that may be. But we know that those things are going to continue to accelerate at this point, regardless of what we do for a while. And it isn't to say that our actions don't matter. They actually do quite a lot. And so I think there's, one of the things in our culture that it's sort of characteristic of a consumer culture is that we sort of, there's an immaturity and an innocence, right? This is being talked about a lot in the racial justice work that is also becoming to the fore in our culture, but it's like, there's no excuse for not knowing what we should know at this point. And so the question is really, how are we going to participate in that? And I think, I remember actually this happened at Banff, Aaron, when we first met. There was a environmental guy. He worked in, I was part of an environmental meeting. This was probably 7 or 8 years ago. I remember this guy who worked in the environmental sector, and he was recounting this experience he had talking to one of his friends about what he did, and thinking, yeah, I'm really, we're really having this great dialogue about climate change. And after they finished the conversation, he said, well, good luck with that. I really hope you make some progress on that, and it's like, it was like his issue, and I think that we need to recognize that the context for all of our issues, no matter what you care about, it's the context in which we live. And I think that creates a lot of opportunity for empowerment, actually, around what we can do. We are both potentially leaders of organizations or staff members, we are consumers, we are voters, we are role models, we're parents. So thinking much more broadly, not just about ourselves as consumers, but as, citizens, really. Not, using the negative connotations of that term, but like really participants in and responsible for the future of our society and our world. So, yeah.
I'm really interested in the whole in leadership. It just keeps popping up, because this march that we're on is inevitable, as Jay notes, and adaptation to the climate emergency and to, so a very different reality that's quickly approaching, I think is going to be so critical. So how are we leading from the middle? How are we leading cooperatively? Vijay, the comment you made about different work structures and sort of, flattened hierarchical work structures, and thinking about cooperatives, I'm just wondering how those could play, or that model could play a role in leading change, and moving away from that kind of individual person that's whatever, trying to drive change. And change, I think, comes from more mass movements of like-minded people who are making small or medium-sized calls for change, or just coming up with different guidelines or ways to work that even in their own small sector or small organization. And Kate, I have worked for a number of small organizations, so I totally see and appreciate that challenge about trying to maintain change. And I think what's helped me is being able to network and create a collaborative of people who are all working towards that as ways to learn from and to cheer on and continue to move things forward, because I do believe in the power of that kind of collective movement and cohort groups making change. I just wanted to raise that up in terms of the whole leadership piece.
No, I think that's great. And Vijay, you also, though, in addition to the sort of the individual, the smaller collective grassroots movements, you also have talked about radical operational changes. And so, like, where do those play together, perhaps?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think let me get my thoughts together. There's something about how when we live in a specific system, whether it's our workplace or just in our greater economy, and we've been called as consumers, these systems really impact the way that we relate to each other. And despite our own personal intentions or values, these systems seem to always trump the ideology and the values embedded in these systems always seem to trump our individual will. And so if we're able to live and create new structures in our workplaces and in the world outside of our workplaces, it will bring out better things in us as people, I think. So that's an important aspect, and that's incredibly related to the system, the capitalist consumer system, colonial system that has created the climate crisis. So those are all very related. The other thing is that getting back to a point I think Krista made about disruptions, also Alexis, these disruptions that are going to be ongoing, continued crises that are localized or global pandemic or whatever, that our impulses to collaborate and to take care, to really start to do the work of caring for each other is incredibly important. And in the cultures and systems we inhabit will bring that out in us so that we can do that better. And I think that's really where the arts, one way the arts can go is to really see how they can actually be a caring entity in their community, both local and virtual. And then practically what that means is, like, if you're not, for example, doing accessibility practices for your online events, that's a good and quick place to start.
Yeah, I think that's so many points are so important that you're making. And there's a really great book that just came out recently called Less is More by this anthropologist called Jason Hickel. And one of the things that they've found, and that he writes about in that book, is that democratic governance is always associated with better care for people and the environment. When any group, it's not just democratic political systems, which we don't actually have, and we know that, but when people are collectively able to make decisions together for the good of the whole, they make the right decision. And so I think that really speaks to the point about changing structures. And it seems like it's not necessarily related to Kate's question. There may be things that don't seem like you may not be able to afford putting solar panels on the roof of your building, but you can practice more democratic decision making, and many small organizations already do. And so I think that also, as if you do look through and do an audit of your activities and look for ways that you can minimize your harm, Also look for ways that you might be able to maximize your benefit in places where maybe you already are. Like, many artists, I think there are artists who fly all the time and go around the world and use a ton of carbon, but most artists that I know in my local community live pretty modest lives. So to ask them to, really cut back more is probably not the best bang for the buck in terms of what we're looking at here, which is not to say everybody should do their part and can, whatever you can do, great. But if you already take the subway, if you already, live in a house with multiple people, like, you're ahead of the game in a lot of ways. So I think that we also need to think about, like, really looking at the places where there's the most bang for the buck, and both in both those senses, in terms of reducing harm, but also, human beings have this capacity to have an impact beyond our species size. Like, we have an impact on everything else. And so a concept I mentioned, permaculture, in the beginning, a concept that permaculture is kind of maximize your impact, actually, not minimize it, but do it in for good, not for evil, and with intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
Maximize your impact. That's, I guess it could be misconstrued, but I really get it in the context that you're using.
Do you have anything else along those lines, Krista, that you just, because I think there is a question in the Q&A about that actually might relate to this maximizing your impact idea, is that in organizations, do we have some thoughts, yes, on what we can do individually, how do we get more democratic decision making, but in some of these big, do we just try to blow it up? Do we make incremental change? Do we have time for incremental change? What is a transformative process, a practical way to think about organizational shifts? If you've maybe seen some examples or have some ideas or some good case studies.
Well, I think the quickest way for any shift to happen in the nonprofit arts is if funders actually make policies that actually mandate certain things. You literally can change the field overnight if that happens. That's the lever to pull.
Agree more, Jay. I mean, that's kind of how our infrastructure is designed, right? That people need incentives to change, and I don't think it's incremental, frankly. I'm tired of incremental change. I'm tired of incremental change around racial justice, gender justice, disability justice, trans justice. It's like, we have all waited way too long, and now you just need to blow it up. And the way to blow it up is to have the accomplices of our funding partners who say, who are already taking major steps to, take the corpus of their money and put it in a different place. And you see how that's shifting tons of ways that people are making decisions about who they're hiring or what they're, what organizations are thriving or at least not failing because they've been under-resourced for so long, and at least now are beginning to get some of their some just investment. So yeah, funders are really critical to this, and not incrementally. That's not how you make change, at least not right now, I don't think. And we don't have time.
I have so many mixed feelings about this. I agree. I think that funders have outsized influence and can put pressure. And in fact, many of you may know already of a group called Julie's Bicycle in the UK, and they have been very successful at encouraging and working with organizations in the UK to develop sustainability plans because they had to, as a condition of funding from the Arts Council of England, which funds everybody. Whereas our funding system doesn't really work quite as, and I don't know enough about Canadian, I know there's some Canadians on the call. I don't know enough about the system there to know whether that would work, but I think that there, pressure can be put. I think one of the things that was really interesting to me about their work is that just developing the plan for sustainability, that was the requirement. You didn't have to deliver on it. You actually just had to develop the plan and submit it. And just doing that, people actually did start to do things, even though they didn't have to. and the well-being and sense of employee satisfaction in the organizations increased. And I don't know, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can interpret why. To me, I think there's something very there's something about being in integrity with the truth of what we know. Some scientists have talked about there being this this way that we're all operating in a sense of denial. Those of us who believe in climate change are still operating in a sense of denial because we acknowledge it on the one hand, and then we say, well, yeah, but I mean, I do need to fly to that really important conference because I've been invited to do the keynote or whatever it is. Go visit my friend in Mexico or something like that. So, we make those kinds of compromises all the time, and so it means that we don't take it as seriously as it actually is. And so I think there is something that feels really aligning and good on an inner level to be sort of operating with, in alignment with the reality that we know is true.
One thing that I think would be a good partnership between organizations and funders is trying to solve this issue that Alexis, you bring up, of like one's career advancement or progress in one's field is right now aligned with mobility and your ability to travel and ability to be in places, the ability to take airplanes. And there is a way, I don't know what it is, but we would be in the correct structure or a structure that is less harmful if we can figure out how to decouple career advancement from fast travel.
That's really so insightful. I'd never even made those connections, but you're absolutely right? And how is that equitable, first of all? And how, and access to movement and career advancement, is limited to the few that have the ability to do that. So thanks for raising that. That's really insightful.
Yeah, and what's striking me too that's come out of this conversation is, the lever to pull, the funder lever, like the big lever. But there are also these smaller cracks in systems that maybe we can start to think about, well, okay, maybe we could just change our hiring practices, or we don't make people go to conferences as often, or are there smaller little shifts institutionally while we're also keeping an eye on the big things? But that, just writing a sustainability plan actually leads to employee wellness is not a thing you would know, but it's the right thing to do. And so I think that also comes back to doing the right thing often leads to more right things, which is, maybe a little bit, fluffy, but also really quite practical of just, so. Any other last questions in the group or thoughts about other practical approaches, or maybe a few words of wisdom or resources that the panelists would like to leave? We've had a couple of URLs in the Less is More book mentioned already. Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, I think I would, this is a really good question. I didn't see it from more about the practical approach, and do we shutter organizations? And as much as I do think some change can happen from above, it's both top down, but it's also bottom up. And I really think that we're seeing this with the racial justice work right now, where it's become unacceptable to have certain people on your board, to have, to say certain things. I mean, it's slower than any of us would like, but I do see this tide turning. And so I also think that artists, grassroots groups can put pressure on the above with sort of setting the culture. So I think that's possible. But I also think that one really important thing, and I hate to leave on a down note, so someone else will have to fill in, is to plan for adaptation as well. Because just like with COVID, with the wildfires, like there are going to be these things happening, and for small groups and artists, really understanding what the issues are in your place and connecting with other people who can help to build resilience around those things.
Thanks, Alexis. I don't know if a famous person said this, but I did hear that art is adaptation plus imagination. I wrote that down somewhere, so I have an interesting idea. But Vijay, Krista, last thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick little tiny project I've been working on that I'm very excited about. It's just, this is basically a carbon emissions calculator for streaming media. And it's just launched it. And it's basically an awareness tool about the costs of our activity, and it masquerading as math and science. It's science. But yeah, it's just a site that may be helpful. The intention there is for people in organizations who are thinking of tapering their travel, tapering their carbon emitting travel, to use this kind of tool or some kind of tool to create a tapering budget of carbon emissions alongside their actual financial budgets.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, another lever for sure. Budgets, definitely. And Krista, the last word from our.
I think the glass is always half full, because we work in a field with a lot of creative people who are passionate about caring for one another and for this earth. So I have no doubt that there will be change where it's needed. And I'm inspired by this conversation and my colleagues, and really hope it's been useful for everybody else. And I'm hoping that we can create more tools like the tool that Vijay is talking about, the tools and sort of structure that Julie's Bicycle created. I think we need language, we need tools in our field to help build that awareness, and to give us steps for how we can make incremental and seismic change. So I'm hopeful that will happen. I look forward to partnering on ways to make that happen.
Thank you all so much. Vijay, Krista, Alexis, thank you for joining me. Thank you for everyone else on the call, on the session. I am looking forward to, oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Erin.
What should suck and what they come up with next. This is going to be talk about a movement, talk about some commitments that, work shouldn't suck. It shouldn't be bad for the environment. It shouldn't be bad for its employees. So I think this kind of movement is, we're part of it, and it's exciting to be here. So thank you all. Thanks for joining us.